all, my name is Shelby Hartman. I'm DoubleBlind's co-founder and editor-in-chief, and today we're talking about 5-MeO-DMT. For those of you who are just becoming interested in psychedelics, you probably haven't heard of 5-MeO-DMT because it's a slightly more obscure psychedelic. If you're someone that has been getting more and more into psychedelics or already is deep within the psychedelic community, then you probably have heard of 5-MeO-DMT and you maybe have or have not tried it. But generally speaking, I'll just say 5-MeO-DMT is a short-acting psychedelic, and some people say it's one of the strongest psychedelics that is really known to man. The thing it's most known for is causing what some people refer to as ego death, and what we at DoubleBlind like to refer to as ego dissolution, because we don't believe the ego can permanently die. It always comes back, for better or for worse. 5-MeO-DMT comes from the Colorado River toad, aka the Sonoran desert toad, which is a flat and squat critter. And to a regular person, no distinctive markings are noticeable on its swampy olive skin. Despite it being rather large, the toad does very little to draw attention to itself. And yet, for an animal that's so easy to miss or ignore, the toad holds an unusual secret, and it's that it's the only animal source of what sometimes people refer to as the God molecule, aka 5-MeO-DMT. Now, let's for a minute talk about the different places that people can source 5-MeO-DMT from, because there's a lot of controversy right now in the psychedelic community about whether it's ethical to extract 5-MeO, as it's referred to for short, from the actual toad, or whether people should be using synthetic 5-MeO instead. As mentioned, 5-MeO is from this excretion of the Colorado River toad, which used to be called, in scientific terminology, the Bufo alvarius, and most people still call it that, but technically now the scientific community refers to it as Incilius alvarius toad, and we have a whole long story on DoubleBlind that explains that, if you're interested. 5-MeO-DMT is also present in some plants, and as mentioned, can be made synthetically, which is the most sustainable way to consume it. It belongs to a class of chemical compounds called tryptamines, which include psilocybin and DMT. In the United States, the Colorado River toad is one of the most common and controversial sources of 5-MeO-DMT. Its native habitat runs along the southwestern United States and northern Mexico. And the controversy comes from the ethics of harvesting toad venom. Even if the toad is caught and released, harvesting venom may introduce pathogens to the toad and also weaken its ability to fend off predators, which can threaten the toad's life and may decrease the species' population. Conservationists also warn against habitat destruction, as more would-be psychonauts seek out the toad for its venom. The oldest known uses of 5-MeO-DMT are not actually associated with toad venom at all. The chemical is also found in Anadenanthera peregrina, or yopo seeds, and varrola bark, which hail from South America and are used to make entheogenic snuff. Both plant-based and synthetic 5-MeO are viable alternatives to toad venom, although the rise in popularity of yopo may also come with its own sustainability issues. Increased global trade of entheogenic plants and psychedelic tourism have the potential to negatively impact Amazonian communities if these activities are performed in an extractive or appropriative way. So in general, we encourage folks at DoubleBlind, if you are taking a psychoactive substance that has a traditional indigenous lineage, to really put care into understanding the history of this substance, where it's being sourced from, if it's being administered by a facilitator, which in the case of ayahuasca or 5-MeO or combo, definitely need a facilitator. Where was your facilitator trained? What is their relationship to the lineage of people who have traditionally used this medicine? 5-MeO, as mentioned, produces an intense but short psychedelic experience, and a full dose lasts between 30 and 90 minutes at most, and the majority are even significantly shorter than that. And while the time on the clock may tick away quickly for those on the outside world, it's important to note that just like with NN-DMT, that's not necessarily the case while you're in the experience. You can lose all perception of space and time, and it can feel like you are like living and floating in an infinite void. During a 5-MeO DMT trip, it's not uncommon for people to feel like they have completely transcended time, and a trip is strong enough to take people out of their normal state of consciousness and into a state of temporary unconsciousness, with ego dissolution making room for therapeutic exploration of the unconscious or an encounter with the divine. It's for this reason that a trip sitter plays an important role in monitoring the person while they're on their journey. You can check out our recent video about a facilitator who was operating completely out of integrity that was administering 5-MeO DMT. But generally speaking, just want to provide the disclaimer that with all psychedelics, you obviously want to be really careful about who you entrust to facilitate for you. 5-MeO is no exception. 5-MeO is an incredibly, incredibly powerful experience, and you likely will be in a state of vulnerability and want to be with someone that you fully, fully trust. The average dosage of 5-MeO DMT is small compared to many other psychedelics. Researchers report that 5 to 7 milligrams is enough to occasion a moderate to strong experience. Those using toad secretion rather than synthetic 5-MeO often take doses of up to 50 milligrams. It's risky, however, for new folks to start with such a dose, which may be overwhelming and more likely to cause negative reactions. As with all psychedelics, start low and go slow, start low and go slow, start low and go slow. I'm not going to tell you how to take it. I'm actually not going to tell you to take it at all, because taking a psychedelic is a deeply personal experience and only each person can make that choice for themselves. But I can talk about how I've done it. The way that I did it was through vaping. Both synthesized 5-MeO DMT and powdered toad venom come in a crystallized or viscous form, and they're often smoked using a high heat pipe or rig. The active effects kick in within a mere couple of seconds after inhalation, causing people to lose their sense of motor control and retreat inward into the depths of their own consciousness. I'll say that when I vape, I only did 5-MeO once. I vaped it. It took about, I don't know, like 8 to 10 hits that I really held in to feel anything meaningful. I think that vapes are typically DMT vapes, whether it's 5-MeO or NN-DMT, are typically weaker than hitting DMT with a dab rig. And so, it just takes more to start to feel kind of those classic psychedelic effects. And I did not get to the point of ego dissolution. I just felt a deep relaxation in my body. I didn't have visuals. I released tears. I released some laughter. But some of the other folks that I was with, because we were doing it, we were all kind of taking turns. We had 2 facilitators and everyone was in a circle and 2 people were going at a time because the experience is so short. And some of the other folks who were in the circle were like, ego splintered into 500 million pieces, shot up into the universe, shot up into the ether, So that's definitely an experience that is not uncommon. 5-MeO DMT, like most classic psychedelics, is federally legal in the United States. Seeds from the yopo tree, though, as mentioned, naturally contain 5-MeO DMT, bufotenine, and DMT in their seed pods. All 3 compounds are psychoactive, although DMT is not orally active on its own. Yopo seed pods were historically mixed with other botanicals to create a snuff used by indigenous cultures in the Orinoco Basin, which spans the northern part of South America. It's likely the combination of different plants that aided in the psychoactivity of yopo snuff. Although yopo can also be used in ayahuasca brews, which historically can contain many different plants and may not always follow one recipe. Actually, it usually doesn't follow one recipe. Today, some psychonauts attempt to use yopo seed as a base in the extraction of purified 5-MeO DMT, which is performed using a series of solvents. However, it's important to note that the yopo seed contains many different chemical constituents, and most simple extractions remove more than simply DMT analogs. In general, we don't recommend you trying to set up like the equivalent of a chemistry lab in your house and start extracting psychedelics from plants. Like, just Not a good idea. The safety and efficacy of concentrating these additional plant compounds is unknown. Additionally, residual solvent can remain in the final extract if the extraction is not properly conducted, which may be harmful if smoked or consumed, depending on the solvents used in the extraction. Also, probably not a surprise, but extracting 5-MeO-DMT is illegal in the United States and many countries. So, just like with NN-DMT or, there's San Pedro, for example, there's a lot of plants that are legal that contain psychedelics, classic psychedelics that can be extracted from them. And but as soon as you, engage in the extraction process, you're doing something illegal. Dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, is the active chemical component in ayahuasca. It's what thousands of tourists seek out during psychedelic pilgrimages to places like Peru, Colombia, and beyond every year. And DMT can also be smoked on its own, occasioning a more rapid, intense trip than the hours-long ayahuasca experience. 5-MeO is a derivative of DMT, meaning that they are related compounds, but the two can produce different experiential and physiological effects. 5-MeO is often considered to be stronger than DMT, and consumers often report that it inspires a potent, transcendent experience devoid of visuals, rather than a highly visual experience such as what DMT is known for. So DMT, and we've talked about this on DoubleBlind, and we've interviewed, sort of the illustrious DMT researcher Rick Strassman on DoubleBlind, but DMT is known for, these entities, some people call them, machine elves, really, really vivid visual experiences. If you Google Alex Gray, for example, who we had on the podcast, if you Google image his work, a lot of his work is inspired by DMT, extremely intricate fractal-like universes. This is not typically what people are seeing on 5-MeO-DMT. 5-MeO-DMT is called the God molecule because it can make someone feel as if they are connected to or becoming one with the divine, which there have been some smaller studies showing that this is therapeutic for folks with depression. So like many other psychedelics, 5-MeO-DMT is considered an entheogen. An entheogen is a chemical compound that may trigger mystical experiences or feelings of intense spirituality and connection with the divine. You don't need to be religious or spiritual to have an entheogenic experience with 5-MeO-DMT or any psychedelic for that matter. Every person's experience is unique, and God is merely just one word to describe the connection that the drug seems to make possible. So I just feel like it's important to say that because I've spoken to atheists and folks who don't believe in God or divinity or some kind of, entity that exists out there in the universe. They're like, I don't believe in that. I'm an atheist. I believe in science. And it's like, okay, well, you don't need to be religious or believe in the concept of God to have a unitive consciousness experience, which is essentially where you feel like the boundaries between yourself and everything that exists outside of you dissolves, right? People use all kinds of words to refer to this state, whether it's nirvana, Gaia, universal consciousness, higher power, or none at all. Like whatever term you use, each person's experience is ultimately different, and the meaning and interpretation of that experience is up to you. So the idea that spirituality can be chemically triggered is one that many people find uncomfortable. But as scientists probe into the mysterious world of psychedelics, many studies are finding that psychedelics can inspire intense mystical experiences similar to spontaneous religious epiphanies and spiritual revelations, and that these chemically induced experiences can be life-changing. Like, there's literally a correlation that scientists are finding between the depth of a divine experience that someone has on a psychedelic and how much healing that they receive from that experience. Some of the core tenets of a mystical experience include this deep-rooted feeling of unity and interconnectedness with the world around you, as well as profound feelings of joy, transcendence of time and space, and feelings of importance beyond the scope of self. And a lot of times this is where the therapeutic aspect of psychedelics can come into, right? Because we're all kind of like the stars of our own movies. Like, that's how the ego works, right? Is that, like, even when we care deeply for others, a lot of our time and energy is spent thinking about ourselves and our problems. And so being able to kind of transcend that sort of modus operandi, that way of being in which we're thinking about ourselves all the time, and remember, we are just infinitesimal things in a big giant universe. You know, that can be deeply cathartic. In the past, I've said I often go into psychedelic experiences with questions, and I come out realizing my questions were too small. And that's what, you know, a really profound psychedelic experience can do, is it can push us beyond ourselves and beyond these sort of habitual ways of thinking and feeling that can sometimes keep us stuck in our lives. In 2011, researchers used psilocybin to test the long-term impact of psychedelic therapy on personality changes in adults. And in general, personality is considered relatively set after adults reach the age of 30. But in this particular study, researchers found that psilocybin could inspire, quote, lasting personality changes for over a year after treatment. Now, researchers are testing the ability of 5-MeO-DMT to bring out similar results, and they've had small successes so far. Recently, researchers proved that the toad molecule indeed can inspire mystical experiences, which we already knew, but sometimes, you know, researchers need to prove things that we already know, and that they may even hold potential as a more manageable therapy tool than psilocybin and LSD. Now, I'll just speak for myself, always have to give the disclaimer that I'm not a doctor, but one of the reasons why I love working with DMT, Changa, which is another form of DMT, is that I don't always have 4 or 6 or 12 hours, right, to have a psychedelic experience. So I like psychedelics that are shorter acting and that can help me kind of connect with that divinity and step outside of myself, but that aren't going to take up an entire day. It's also important to name that, of course, not everybody is going to have this awe-inspiring interaction with 5-MeO-DMT. As mentioned, when I did it, I didn't do very much, and I got a good cry in, but it wasn't anything that was life-changing. It's also possible to have a very challenging experience, right? One that's uncomfortable, even traumatizing, especially if you're in an environment where you don't feel safe. Unlike your average medicine, there's no regulation nor substantive clinical research that provides guidance about how to use 5-MeO-DMT. There's much less research on 5-MeO-DMT than there is on psilocybin and LSD. There's even some studies on ayahuasca now, right? But there's not that much on 5-MeO. In recent years, 5-MeO has garnered some attention among the scientific community, and the compound is particularly intriguing to those interested in psychedelic therapy. As mentioned, you know, it can inspire profound experiences in a very short time span, less than half an hour. But research on 5-MeO is just beginning, and I think that that's important to keep in mind. Nevertheless, based upon some of the very preliminary research, some of the conditions that researchers hypothesize 5-MeO-DMT might be useful for are alcoholism, depression, anxiety, mindfulness, and neurogenesis, which is the growth of new neurons in the brain and a process that generally slows down in adulthood. Researchers discovered that a single dose of 5-MeO-DMT stimulated neurogenesis, resulting in new neuronal connections, and they speculate that this is one of the sources of 5-MeO-DMT's antidepressant effects. Like many other compounds from psychoactive plants and animals, 5-MeO-DMT is generally considered a toxin. Death and paralysis are common among dogs and other animals who eat the Colorado River toad, which produces its venom to deter predators. So don't let your golden doodle eat a Colorado River toad if you see one. This particular species is actually responsible for the majority of amphibian-based poisonings among pets, to be serious. But that being said, humans are certainly different than dogs and cats, and small doses of 5-MeO-DMT are thought to be relatively safe and carry a low potential for substance dependence. It's important to keep in mind that a lack of research does not equate to a lack of risk. And on the flip side, a lack of research also doesn't equate to definitive danger. It just simply means we don't know. And many health professionals have concerns about psychedelic use among those who are predisposed to psychosis and other mental health ailments. particularly bipolar, schizophrenia, or personal or family history of psychosis as well. Additionally, there's very little information available about potential drug interactions between 5-MeO-DMT and common pharmaceutical drugs. That's not as much the case with classic psychedelics like psilocybin and LSD. Granted, if you're on an SSRI or something like that, usually a facilitator is not going to administer a more classic psychedelic like shrooms or LSD, but there's a lot of anecdotal reports kind of indicating that for the most part, people tend to be safe. With 5-MeO-DMT, we don't have that. One thing we'll say is that with 5-MeO-DMT, there is a potential risk of developing serotonin syndrome, which can cause seizures and even death as the body is flooded with too much of the neurotransmitter serotonin, and it's therefore risky to mix with drugs like MDMA, LSD, and others that also act on the serotonin system. Tryptamines, like 5-MeO, may also have an effect on the cardiovascular system, which means that those with pre-existing heart conditions may experience undeserved complications. The short answer is that whether or not 5-MeO-DMT is legal depends on where you are. Given the 5-MeO is a fairly novel psychedelic, many countries do not have laws governing its production or distribution. Thus far, its usage is not restricted in Canada or Mexico, which is why we've seen 5-MeO retreats popping up in Mexico, but several countries have gone as far as to list the hallucinogen as a controlled substance, including the United States. 5-MeO-DMT is illegal in the United States, China, Australia, New Zealand, Turkey, and several European countries. Generally, I'll say that 5-MeO-DMT is a really interesting psychedelic. Should you try it? I'm not going to tell you to do it or to not do it. I often like to default to the sort of counsel of Bia Labache, who's a cultural anthropologist and the founder of the platform Shakruna. She once told me, to really just tune in with yourself and see what you feel called to do. I know that might seem like kind of woo-woo language to people. You can also, do the sort of practical homework of going online and going on DoubleBlind's website and seeing, what's the legality and what's the promise for certain therapeutic conditions and how long does it last and where do you get it and all of these things. But at the end of the day, it's like when you hear about what many people experience when they're on this substance, does that in your body intuitively feel like an experience that you would like to have or that would be beneficial, right? And then the next step is like, okay, is it safe based upon my medical and psychological history? And if so, then like, where do I go to have an experience where I feel safe and supported? 5-MeO-DMT is just substantively different from classic psychedelics like ayahuasca, LSD, and psilocybin. And so does that appeal to you or not? It's only a decision that you can make for yourself. If you're interested in reading more about 5-MeO and other psychedelics or learning more about other psychedelics, we have tons of videos on this YouTube channel, and we have tons of free articles and great journalism as well on doubleblindmag.com. Until next time.